Welcome to the Getting the Most Out of Surfer's Base Map webinar. Hi everyone, my name is Drew and I'll be the presenter for today's presentation. I'm here to give you the lowdown on how to create base maps in Surfer and fully customize them by adding features, changing the symbology, editing features, and then also copying the format from one layer to another. After the discussion of each topic, I'll stop for a few minutes to answer any questions. You can send your questions to the webinar host, Brittany, via the questions function at any time. You should notice there is a questions box on the webinar control panel. It's right underneath the audio section. This is where you can type in your question and it'll be sent to the webinar host, who can then forward it to me to answer. If you notice that your control panel is minimized, please click the View menu and uncheck the Auto Hide Control Panel option, and this will allow you to view that entire panel so you can send questions in. We also are recording today. Towards the end of the week, we will have a video of today's recording available on our support website at support.goldensoftware.com. Specifically, today I'll be walking everyone through the entire base map creation and editing process. Specifically, I'll be focusing on creating base layers from multiple vector and raster files at the same time. We're going to talk about editing individual features of vector base layers using the new process where you don't have to enter the group to edit the layers. I'm also going to show you how to create polyline and polygon features in a base layer in map coordinates. We'll be applying symbology to a base layer. I will also show you how to copy the formatting from one base layer and then apply it to another base layer to save you some clicks. And also we'll be finishing up with creating polygons from special shapes to use to assign node data values to grid files. All right, as you can see, there's a lot of information to cover today, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, before I get into creating new features and editing and manipulating features in base layers, I wanted to start out by first discussing creating vector and raster base layers by importing multiple vector and raster base layer files at the same time. And so I just said this a minute ago, but this is a huge time saver. So if you worked with older versions of Surfer, you should remember that you could only create a single layer at a time. This is not the case anymore. In the current version of Surfer, you can use the multi-select to select multiple base layer files at the same time, and Surfer will create separate base layers from the selected files within the same project. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. You can see on screen I have a new blank plot document open, so I have a fresh palette to work with. I'm first going to create a map that has multiple vector base layers and multiple raster base layers by importing them into the same project. The workflow I'm using here is really the same as if you were only creating a single base map layer, except I'll be using multi-selection to select multiple files at the same time. All right, so in the new plot document, I'm going to go up to the ribbon and click Home, New Map, and the Base command. When I do so, you see the import dialog, and this is where I'm going to multi-select a couple of TIFF image files or aerial images that I want to include in the map. Okay? You can see here at the bottom of the list, I'm going to hold down the Control key here on my keyboard and select the other TIFF file. And now with both of these TIFF files or aerial images selected, you can move down and click the Open button here on the import dialog to create the maps from both images. Bring these into focus here so you can see them a little bit better. And you should notice here that both of the maps were created, but also in the contents window, you may have noticed that there were two map frames created. Okay, and you can see that my maps are not spatially tied together, and they're actually separate maps. Okay, and so this means that, again, that both of these maps are not tied together using the coordinates, or spatially tied together, and still need to be overlaid. Okay. We can tie these two maps together or overlay them pretty easily by going up to the ribbon and clicking Home, Selection, and Select All. Okay. I could also use Control A in this situation. And you should notice now that the bounding box on our plot window surrounds both, or includes both of these TIFF files, or these base maps that I loaded. And then also in the contents window, you should notice that both of the maps are selected. Now to overlay these, I can go up to the ribbon and click Map Tools, and Overlay Maps. You should notice now that we have a single map frame here in the contents window, and the maps are spatially tied together. So you can notice when I move them around, they move together. Now, the same process of loading multiple files at the same time also works with vector-based layers. For this next process, I'm going to import a number of different shape files into the same map and the same map frame all at the same time. And this is going to give our map a good frame of reference by adding some additional features. This time around, I'm going to add the base layers again to this existing map frame instead of creating separate map frames from them. Okay. To do so, I need to make sure that my map is selected either by clicking anywhere in the plot window, or by selecting the map in the contents window. And this time I'm going to use Home, Add to Map, because I want to add to the existing map frame. And in the layer dropdown, I'm going to use the base option. Okay. Again, we see the import dialog. I'm going to use the same process where I'm going to select my first shape file here, hold down the Control key on my keyboard. You could also shift click these if you wanted to, just to make sure I'm using multi-select in the import dialog. And then I'm going to click Open to add these to the existing map. All right, so what's cool about adding the vector data to the existing map frame at the same time is that I do have the choice of whether or not I want to clip that vector data to the existing map limits. And so this makes it really easy to create a map at a specific mapping extent. And again, my mapping extent here would be defined by the two TIFF files that I imported. Okay, so you should notice here that I'm being prompted to modify the existing map limits when adding each layer. Okay, this is because the shape files that I'm loading in have a larger XY extent than the TIFF images I started out with. And as you know, this is a really common situation where it's typical to have data sets that have varying XY extents. All right, so in these warning dialogues, I'm going to go ahead and click No to retain the existing XY limits of the map frame I've already created. So each time that I click No here, you should notice that another layer has been added to the map and the layer stack here in the contents window. All right, so you should notice here now that we've got a map with a number of different layers here. You can see there's 7 different layers in my contents window, and this is a variety of raster and vector-based layers. Okay, and so let's go ahead and change some of the properties of these base layers so they look more appropriate. So the first thing that I want to do here is I'd like to change some of the properties of the bottom 2 layers, or the raster-based layers, so they have the same transparency. And I'm also going to adjust some of the image properties like the contrast, the saturation, and the brightness. And this will create a nice looking blended base map from the raster base layers that I imported here just a few minutes ago. Now Surfer is going to allow me to copy the properties after I set them on one layer and then apply those same properties to another layer, saving me clicks and also giving me some consistency across the way the properties are set for both layers. Okay, so let's take a look and see how this works. All right, so before I do anything, I'm going to drag my nape image here that I have selected in the contents layer just above the hillshade layer, right? And this changes the drawing order, right? And so whatever's listed on top here will be drawn on top of whatever's listed below. All right, so I'm going to move down with that nape layer selected here. I'm going to move down to the properties window. And again, I'm going to change some of these properties here, like contrast and the brightness. And you can see each time I make a change here, my base map does look a little bit different. Okay. And I'm also going to change the saturation a little bit. Okay. And also I'm going to click over to the layer tab. I'm going to adjust this opacity here. I could use the slider if I wanted to, or else I can merely highlight the value. I'm just going to type in 50. That's going to give me a 50% transparency on my base layer. Okay, and you can see that I'm getting a really nice effect here with the underlying images on the map. And what I want to do is I want to copy these properties from this one selected base layer and all those changes I just made by right-clicking, and in the context menu, I'm going to choose Copy Properties. Now we can apply these, again, saving clicks here and without going into the property manager, to my other raster base layer, simply by right-clicking, and in the context menu, we have a Paste Properties option. When I do so, you can see that my map changed ever so slightly. Okay, and if we tab back and forth here between the two layers, I can check this, and you can see that they both have the same opacity setting, and they also have the same image property settings. Okay. All right. And so doing this is really going to allow me to create a nice looking background image for the map, which again is a blend of the hillshade and the aerial images that I brought in. Now I'm going to use the same process of copying and pasting the properties one more time so you can see it again, this time with the rivers and the water body vector base layers. And as you can see that these layers are a little hard to see, a little bit difficult to depict what features are going on in the current map. And so I really want the rivers and the water bodies to pop a little bit more, and I can do so by changing the line and the fill color. All right, so back in the contents window, I'm going to select my water bodies layer, move down to the general tab here, and I'm going to change my line properties here by using smalt blue. Okay, and also my fill. I'm going to fill the water bodies using the same color. Okay, smalt blue. All right, and it's much easier to see these on the map. All right, again, going back up to the contents window, I'm going to right-click on the layer and choose Copy Properties. Of course, I could use Control-Shift-C if I wanted to. And then I'm going to locate now the rivers layer here in my map, and I'm going to right-click and use Paste Properties. Of course, that could be Control-Shift-V as well. All right, so you can see now that I applied the same colors here to the rivers layer as well. And so now both those water bodies and the rivers are definitely easier to find on the map. All right, so I wanted to do one more thing here to my base map, or before I stop for a minute or two to answer any questions that may have came up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some labels to my county's base layer. Okay. So I can do so simply by selecting my county's boundary here, going down to the labels tab. And you can see that, and I wanted to bring this up, when I select a vector base layer, you can see that I have this nice orange reddish arrow, and this indicates that I'm in some sort of editing mode and that layer is selected. All right, so back down to the properties. I'm going to change the label source to one of the attributes that contains the county names, right, which is name 2 for this particular file. They are a little bit hard to see here. I'm going to turn them white. And then also I want to change the drawing order of the base layers a little bit so these labels are drawn on top. You can see that I have some of the rivers and water bodies going over the labels, the county labels themselves. So what I can do is I can simply use drag and drop again to change the drawing order here in the contents window. So for example, I can drag this base layer right up to the top of the layer stack and release it. And you can see that that layer is now drawn on top. Okay. All right, so I think this is a good point in today's presentation to take a quick pause to answer any questions that may have came up. So if you have any questions about what I've covered so far, please feel free to send those over to Brittany at this time. All right, thank you. I have one question here. Were the TIFF images used, were they created from Google Earth and then georeferenced, or are they from a surfer database? Really good question. So you can see that I have two different images here. These images were both downloaded directly from the USGS national map, so they were free. They were already georeferenced, and I did change the extent ever so slightly on these before I started my presentation, so I cropped them down a little bit, but they were already georeferenced and were free for me to download from the national map server. So, great question. I have another question. Can you create the vector and the raster base layers at the same time? Absolutely. So you noticed when I first created the map that I added the TIFF images, and then I added the shape files to that existing map. And I did this because I wanted to show you how Surfer clips the extents. Of course, these layers all have different extents. Now, I could have selected all the TIFFs and the shape files at the same time and created them and then overlaid them. However, I like the way this workflow goes a little bit better because I could establish the extent in the X and Y directions prior to importing the vector data, right? And then again, we saw that it was clipped to those to the existing map frame extent. Really good question. And it looks like I have time for one more. A question is, can I export a geotiff from a map? And this was sent in by Oliver a little bit earlier this morning before the webinar was created. And the question is absolutely yes, as long as you know that your coordinate system is set, right? As I click down these layers, you can see that the source coordinate system is set for all my layers, and then also my map. So this could be easily, everything here could be incorporated into a geotiff by using file export. Changing my save as type here to TIFF. Of course, this doesn't say geotiff, but when I do export it, I get the export options dialog. And to make this specifically a geotiff, technically, you need to have that spatial referencing information saved in the header. So I would make sure I checked internal file format. Okay? And technically that makes it a TIFF. Okay? So as easy as that. All right, thank you everyone for the questions. I'm going to go ahead and move on here and continue working with this same map and these same base layers inside of Surfer. All right, so I'm going to bring this a little closer into focus here. And you should notice here in the map that the roads layer and the counties layer have the same line styles. They're both black and are really a little difficult to depict from one another. You can't really tell what's a road and what's a county boundary unless you're from this area. So what I'm going to do now to make these a little bit easier to decipher is I'm going to apply some symbology to the roads base layer so they're more easily identifiable on the map. So for those of you that aren't as familiar with symbology, this is a method in Surfer that applies the line, fill, and or symbol properties to the selected features within a base layer depending on a specific set of attribute values. Okay, and of course I am working with shapefiles, so we do have that DBF that's associated or the attribute table that's associated with each one of these layers. So the first thing that I usually do typically before I apply symbology to a map is I want to take a look at really what attribute values does the selected layer have for itself, and then we can get a good idea of which attribute value to use to apply the symbology to. Okay, and so to open up that attribute table, let's take a look at that. To open up the attribute table for the roads layer, I'm going to go back to the contents window, simply click on my roads layer. Again, you see that nice little orange arrow that indicates that I'm both have that layer selected and also that I'm in an editing mode. Okay, and so now that I have the layer selected, let's take a look at the attribute table. Okay, by going up to the ribbon, I'm going to click Map Tools, Layer Tools, and Open Attribute Table. All right, and so now you can see that attribute table that has looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different fields for each one of the polyline features within the base layer. Okay, so for each road section, and you can see that there are some various types of data here. We've got some sort of road or trail designation, a couple other attribute fields here, United States and USA. Of course, these are all located in the United States. This isn't necessarily that helpful. But we also have a median description here, which says it does or does not, or unknown whether or not there's a median on that particular section of road. And then finally, over here on the right-hand side, we have the RTT description field. For this particular file, this tells us whether or not that particular road selection is a secondary route, a primary route, or an unknown route. Okay, and so we'll use this attribute field, the RTT description field, to base the symbology on for the roads layer. Now, since we've made this decision, we've taken a look at the fields that are available here for all of our polyline road sections. I'm going to go ahead and close out the attribute table because I don't think we really need it anymore. All right, and now I'd like to take that RTT description field and apply symbology to the roads layer, again, based on that specific attribute field. All right, to do so, again, just need to verify that I have the layer that I want to work with selected, which is the roads file or layer, which is great. Then I'm going to move down to the properties window. I'm going to click on that general tab, and you should see there's a symbology section. Right next to it is an edit symbology button. So I'm going to go ahead and click the edit symbology button to launch the symbology dialog. All right, here in the symbology dialog, there's a number of different ways that we can apply the symbology to all the objects within that vector vector base layer. Okay, and so you can take a look at these. For this particular example, I'm going to use unique values, which are going to take where Surfer takes all the unique values found in whatever attribute field that I pick. All right, again, I'm going to move over and change the attribute field to the RTT description field. Again, it'll pull all of the unique values out, and then we can classify and assign properties according to these different values. So in order to see all these, I need to move over to the very left-hand side here, this row of icons, and click the Add All button. Okay, and once I do so, you can see here in the volume column, it was exactly what we saw in the attribute table. These were the only unique ones that we had: primary route, secondary route, and unknown. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply click over here in the line column on the right-hand side. You can see that I have the option to change any of the properties for anything that contains primary route. I'm going to make these yellow and increase the width just a little bit. Move down to secondary route. I think I'm going to make these white. Okay, and increase the width just a little bit. And then finally, for the unknown routes, I'm going to make these gray, which is technically 30% black. And then bump up the width again. And since I'm only working with polyline features, I really don't need to worry about this fill or the symbol properties here. But if I was working with a file, perhaps a DXF, where it contains multiple object types, this would be applicable. But since there's no polygons or symbols in our roads layer, I'm going to go ahead and click OK, which is going to apply the symbology to all the roads. Here we go. All right, so you can see now that all of these features in the map are much easily more identifiable from one another. You can clearly see the roads and those boundaries for each one of the counties. Definitely looks different. And then also, you're not getting confused with the rivers or the water bodies. They all look different from one another. All right, and so what we have now is a real nice looking base map where we can add additional information to, and it is really a good start of a detailed mapping project. All right, so I'm going to take another real quick pause here to answer any questions that may came up about symbology. So if you have any of those questions, please by all means send those on over to Brittany so I can get those answered. Okay, so she's letting me know that there's no outstanding questions, which is just fine. If you think of anything, I am going to break for one more time here at the end of the webinar to answer any questions that may have came up. So if anything comes to mind. Okay, hold on one second. Let's see, can we move the labels for the counties where the label is cut off of the page? And so I'm going to zoom in here, right here, and you can see, yeah, that label is cut off right here a little bit. So let's see what we can do with those. All right, and so let's see. So if I click and make sure that I'm in the editing mode here, I can choose the Map Tools Edit Layer Label, Layer Labels. Move this to any location I want. That's a really good question. In the same mode, I can move these around just a little bit if I wanted to. And you should notice my mouse pointer is in a little bit, looks a little different. That means that I am in some sort of editing mode. Once I'm done, let's say I'm done moving these labels around, I'm going to go ahead and click the escape key, and you can see that my command is no longer active, and I have my standard mouse pointer back. All right, any more questions? All right, again, if anything comes to mind here during the last portion here of the webinar, please by all means send those over. I'd love to get everything answered. All right, so I'm going to bring my map back into focus here, and let's move on to the final portion of today's presentation, which I'm going to focus on adding new vector features to my base layer so we can edit them, and then also use them to create profiles, and finally to assign node data to a grid file in order to limit some contours to a specific area within the map. All right, so the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to add some rectangles to use to highlight a specific area of interest within the map. Okay, so I'm going to first zoom in here, just using my mouse wheel to a location that's a little central to the map. You can see this is, for those of you who know, this is downtown Denver, and I'm going to be focusing on an area that's a little northwest of downtown. Okay. And I'm going to add, again, some rectangles to define the area of interest. So before I can add the rectangles and add those features to the map, the first thing I need to do is I'm going to add an empty base layer to our map, and then I can draw those rectangles to that layer. Okay, and so let's go ahead and add that empty base layer. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure my map is selected. I'm going to move up to the Home ribbon tab, move over to the Add to Map section, and in the Layer dropdown, this time I'm going to select Empty Base. All right, so you should notice that we have a new layer here that's been added to the layer stack here in the Contents window. And I know this is the one that I just added because if I expand this layer, I don't see any objects here. If I expand any of these other layers, we do see either points, lines, or polygons, or a combination of the three. And you can also know that Surfer always adds vector base layers to the top of that layer stack. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have it selected. Again, you should notice that little orange arrow next to the layer. Again, this is indicates that you're in an editing mode for that particular layer, right? And so for those of you that are used to the older versions of Surfer, you no longer have to enter a group to perform edits or enter the layer to perform edits. And you can just perform the edits when the layer is selected. So this means that any features that I draw now on the map are going to be added to this new layer we added to the map, and will also be drawn in mapping coordinates, right? And again, will be spatially tied to the map. So this is particularly useful, and again, we're saving you clicks here. This is particularly useful if you're going to be exporting features or layers from the map that you're going to use in another mapping project here in Surfer, or even exporting to use in other third-party mapping applications. Okay. So let's go ahead and add some rectangles that are in mapping coordinates. Okay. So I'm going to go up to the Features tab here in the ribbon, and I'm going to click Features, Insert, Rectangle. Okay. Should notice now, and it's a little hard to see, but my mouse is turned into a crosshair, and this would be indicative of being in a drawing mode. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add some rectangles here. And I'm drawing these overlapping on purpose. Okay. And you can see that I'm now done, and I'm going to click the escape key on my keyboard. I get my standard mouse pointer back. And if I expand that base layer, you can see that I have all three rectangles. All right. Then let's say I wanted to move these around a little bit. I could bump them up a little bit. Okay. Always good to know where the undo key is here. Oh. All right, so now let's say that I wanted to combine these rectangles into a single polygon, so I could use it to assign node data to a grid file, and then perhaps restrict the contours within this area of interest polygon to show only display within the polygon. All right, and this can be done by making sure that I have my base layer expanded here so I can see all the objects. I'm going to use the control key on my keyboard and select all three here, and you should notice on screen here there's a bounding box that has selected all three and encompasses all three of the rectangles. Now I can join these together by clicking Features, New Features, Union of Polygons. When I do so, Surfer asks me if I want to keep those original objects. I don't for this example, so I'm going to leave this option unchecked and go ahead and click OK. And you can see now that we have one single polygon here that was generated from those three rectangles. It is a little bit hard to see here, so I'm going to fill it so we can a little bit easier to see our area of interest here. Change the line color, and we can more easily see our area of interest. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more here so we can see it. All right. And again, this area of interest has now been added as a layer, a vector-based layer, and is in mapping coordinates. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a contour layer here to our map. And of course, need to make sure the map is selected. Home, add to map in the layer. This time I'm going to select contour. I'm going to select a grid file and click open. And then, of course, let Surfer load the file in. These contours are a little bit hard to see. They're there, trust me, but I can make these a little bit more visible. I'm going to change my contour interval from 200 down to 10. Should get a lot more contour lines this way. Just give Surfer a moment to think here. All right. And if I do fill these contours here, I'm going to change the color map first. Again, let Surfer think for just a moment. I can fill those contours so we can see what they look like. And of course, they do extend past here my area of interest. And the reason this is taking a little bit longer than expected is because this is a very dense grid file that I loaded. All right, and so you can see the contours do fill here. I'm going to take my fill out. All right, just another second here. And so let's go ahead and use this area of interest polygon here on our vector base layer to assign node data to this particular contour file. All right, so we can easily do that by going up to the grids ribbon and clicking Edit Assign Node Data. And since I've already loaded both of these files into the mapping project, I can find them in the drop-down menus here. For example, the input grid here in the Assign Node Data to Grid dialog. And my node data polygon, I'm going to select base vector. That's the name of this layer. Of course, I want to assign node data outside. I'm going to name my file here just by appending node data here. And then I'm also going to tell Surfer to add this new contour map here, or the new grid file as a contour layer rather, to the existing map frame. Okay, and give Surfer just a second here. We are working with spatial referenced files, right? So the coordinate systems are already set. And so I'm going to go ahead and choose to save the Esri PRJ and the XML file by clicking OK. All right, Surfer is telling me here that my grid file has been assigned no data and is adding a new contour layer here to our map. You can see that we have a new layer added to the top of the map stack. I'm going to turn off those contours outside of our no data area or our area of interest polygon, and then make these a little bit easier to see here. Go ahead and fill those contours. And then also I'm going to change the opacity here to 50. All right. So for the last portion here of the webinar, I'm going to add a few polylines here to our map that can be used as transects for profiles. And then I'm going to use those transects to actually add the profiles to the map. Okay. For this process, I'm going to add 3 more empty base layers to the map so I can draw these transects to each of these layers. So again, using the same process I used just a few minutes ago, I'm going to add empty base layers by making sure that the map is selected. But this time, instead of going up to the ribbon and clicking Home, Add to Map in the Layer dropdown, I think it's a little quicker to right-click, choose Add to Map, and you can see the same layer list that we see in that Layer dropdown in the ribbon. I'm going to use Empty Base. And again, I'm going to repeat this a few times. Again, empty base, and one more time, empty base. And you can see now that I've got 3 empty layers here ready to take on any objects. So before I draw some polylines to these, I'm going to right-click and choose Rename Object just so I can differentiate these here in just a few minutes. Again, rename the second empty base layer that I've got here. And the third one. All right, so now that I've renamed these, I can easily figure out which ones layers I'm working with. I'm going to make sure that I have transect 1 selected, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a polyline here by going to Features, Insert Polyline. Should notice my mouse My mouse pointer looks like crosshairs. I'm going to draw a transect across our area of interest. Double click when I'm done. And I'm going to select the second transect base layer. And you can see that my tool is still active, which is great. I'm just going to draw a transect right across here. Again, we're going to use these to create profiles here in just a second. And then with the third, I'm going to draw another one across our area of interest. I'm going to make these a little easier to see here. I'm going to make these white. Okay, and then increase the width just a little bit. Like so. And I can now use these as transects to create profiles with. All right, and now that I'm done drawing the polylines, I'm going to click the escape key on my keyboard, or even go up here to the quick access toolbar to get my mouse pointer back. And before I create the profiles here, I'm going to zoom out and change the limits to my map because I don't really need all this other information out here on the outside. So with the map selected, I can use map tools. Map tools set limits, and I can do this manually by dragging and dropping. Nope. These nice grips to my new extent. All right, and so I've clipped the map down, and now I'm going to rescale. Zoom out just a little bit here so I can see more of the map. And then let's add these profiles. So I'm going to go back up to my contents window. And now in Surfer, you can use these polylines that I've added, these transects, to create the profiles from. So what I can do is I can right click on the profile line, and in the context menu, go down to add profile. Okay. Profile 1 here. Going to move it over just a little bit. Going to do the same thing here for that second transect. Again, right click, choose add profile. Move this down just a little bit here. And I'm going to use the third transect that I added, or that third polyline. Same process, right click, add profile. Let's zoom out so you can see all three here. And of course, if I wanted to, I could edit any of these properties of the profiles, but that's a little bit out of scope here for today's presentation. Show the color scale, and we also might want to show a legend, so I can add one somewhere in the map here. And if I zoom in here to the legend, you can see that I have the fill, the lines, and the symbol. I can easily remove those other entities by going down to the Layers tab in the Properties and on my template. I don't need the symbol here, and I don't need the fill. All right, and so I'm going to open it back up for any other questions that may have came up during this last portion of the webinar. So if you have any questions, please feel free to send those on over to Brittany. So I do have a few minutes before my hour's up, and I'd like to get any of the questions answered that I can. So again, if you have any questions, please send those on over. All right, Brittany's letting me know that there's no questions to be answered. All right, so that concludes my presentation of the Getting the Most Out of Surfers Base Map webinar. Hopefully everyone found the information I covered today useful and applicable to their workflows. If you have any questions now that we're concluding the presentation, you can contact our support team at support@goldensoftware.com. And again, a recording of today's presentation will be posted shortly on our support website at support.goldensoftware.com. And as always, on behalf of Golden Software, we thank you very much for your time.